Hello everyone, this is part 44 of What If Naruto Was Like the Sage of Six Paths, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Naruto staggered back, the wispy, ethereal form hovering just above Nagato's head, tearing away from his palm as the almost identical one hovering about his own form tore away from the other Rinnegan uses emaciated hand. He tripped over his own feet, breathing heavily as he fell backwards, his eyes wide and unseeing for a moment as his mind struggled to take in almost a lifetime of information. Nagato seemed to be in the same state of shock, bringing one arm up to rub at his temple, a wince pulling at his gaunt features. However, the blonde was worse off. With Nagato's memories came all those that he too had taken in through his human path. The only reason the blonde didn't lose his mind from all the information was due to Nagato rarely taking more information than he needed to from his victims, having refined his use of the human path to only take what he required information-wise. For a moment the two were silent, coping and mulling over what they had witnessed. Slowly though, Rinnegan eyes met Rinnegan eyes and a tense pressure fell over the strange papery tree Nagato had been using to hide. Naruto blinked as he remembered Konan had built it for him. No, for Nagato. He quickly shook his head to try and regain his senses, doing his best to parry in the information to protect his Idini. How? Nagato's voice was a little more ragged than before, his previously calm composure giving way to a mildly confused and frustrated expression on his sunken face. Our lives, they are so similar, there are so many parallels yet. Naruto slowly got to his feet, his body feeling strange as his mind rationalized away decades of not being able to use his legs and the dull throb of the chakra receivers implanted into his back. Yet, we took such different paths. Nagato looked up from where he had been vacantly staring into the ground, his eyes twisted into visages of confusion. Why? Why did you choose to ignore it? The hate, the loathing of the people around you, their ignorance was slowly stripping away at you. It seemed Nagato had none of the issues integrating the memories that Naruto had, it must have been from experience. However, Naruto just sighed at the question, rubbing at the phantom pain in his back. I'm not sure what to tell you, to be honest. Back then I was naive, I could only latch onto the small ray of light I had with the Ichirakis. You were the same with Ka, your parents. If Nagato noticed the small slip, he didn't say anything, instead frowning intensely as if searching through Naruto's memories again, looking for what exactly it was that had made him so different. You have experienced it, pain, real pain. You have lost the people you care about over and over. You have the same power as me, greater even. Nagato had seen Naruto's whole life, he was under no illusion the kind of suppressed power Naruto had brimming under the surface, just waiting for that slip in emotion, that crack in his mental forehead to come pouring out. It was literally only Naruto's denial to use power he didn't believe belonged to him that had stopped him from crushing Nagato's puppets into dust. Is that what separates us, the fact you are a Jinchuriki? Naruto sighed again as he walked forward, making Nagato involuntarily flinch even though he should have known better. I can't say, I am who I am because of Kurama, but only in the same way that everyone who I have known has shaped the way I see things, the way I understand things. Even you have shown me this, standing against me with so similar a goal and yet so different a method. However, a scowl briefly crossed over Naruto's face as his hand tightened into a fist. Yahiko's dream was so pure. Nagato looked up, surprise widening his eyes at the sudden statement. And I can see how it was twisted into this abomination of the Akatsuki, but that doesn't mean it was wrong. An image of the masked man who Naruto now knew claimed to be Madara Uchiha flitted across both of their minds. What would you do? Naruto blinked, the question catching him off guard. He already knew what the red-haired man was asking without needing him to elaborate. Peace, true peace. To be honest, it was never something that had really crossed the young monk's mind, at least outside of the most idealistic dreams. Far from popular belief, monks did not strive to bring peace between all men, many only sought their own enlightenment, to escape the cycle of samsara forever. It was actually ironically selfish of them. Even Naruto had never put much thought to it, understanding of chakra and protecting that which was precious to him, they were his goals. The closest he had ever come to such an idea was wanting to make sure the Bayu was safe, to end their own hatred. I don't know. Nagato just nodded slowly, the smallest of sighs escaping his pale lips. It was an unfair question to put someone on the spot with, and really, he had already known what Naruto would say, having gained a good understanding of the young monk from his memories and the emotion they conveyed. But, the redhead looked up in surprise to see Naruto looking right at him, thoughtful and determined. I can't accept your way. Understanding pain may be the fastest way to broker peace, but to force it upon humanity would be a hollow victory. Peace is important, it gives us all something to strive towards and hope for. But without the freedom to pave that future for ourselves, it becomes worse than worthless. There was silence for only a moment before Nagato gave a short, dry chuckle that seemed to reverberate around the hollow, paper tree. Perspective is such a strange thing, isn't it? Naruto couldn't help the small smile that graced his own features. How strange that he was able to smile with the man that only minutes ago had been trying to kill him. I had a sensei once, Naruto nodded, he remembered Jiraiya from the memories, and it was his dream to see a world filled with understanding between all men. I imagine he would be so ashamed to see what I have turned that dream into. Naruto frowned at that, trying to compare his admittedly limited interaction with the Toad Sage to the plethora of memories, spanning over years, that Nagato had. Maybe, but at the same time he would try to understand. To be honest, Naruto was surprised at the side of Jiraiya he had seen through that flurry of memories. He was almost fatherly. Nagato looked up, searching Naruto's face for a moment as if for some assurance before tiredly nodding. Where does that leave us then, the two legacies of the sage, standing on opposing sides? Naruto's frown only deepened as he traced a small circle in the dusty floor with his foot. We don't have to be, you know, to give up on peace now because of a defeat would be like stepping on those dreams you inherited from Jiraiya. You are the leader of a megacorps, surely there is at least something you can do with that position alone. Nagato's face grew grim as the two stared at one another, Naruto's words still hanging in their air. I ruled, because they believed I was a god, able to defeat Hanzo, one of the strongest shinobi of the age, and easily bend the country to my aims. I am no real leader, even the day-to-day running of the village and the country as a whole I left to Konan. At that Nagato's eyes seemed to widen, suddenly looking across at Naruto questioningly, to which the blonde simply nodded. It's okay, I was thinking about it myself. Nagato nodded his thanks and slowly pulled his other hand free of its strange rubbery binding. Tired, the two began to slowly go through hand seals before the surfaces in front of them and watching as identical sealing matrices spread from that point of contact. Kuchios. In twin plumes of smoke the inside of the hollow tree suddenly became more crowded. Next to Naruto, Fu appeared, making the blonde instantly worry as he looked over the girl's battered and rather burned body. Her own natural, or at least given, healing factor was already compensating, but her unconscious features were screwed up in an expression of discomfort. It eased Naruto's heart a little to see that ebb away into a more serene, calmer expression as he waved a green glowing hand over the wounds, doing what he could given the circumstances and his own exhaustion. We are lucky, aren't we? The young monk looked up to see Nagato staring down at Konan's equally battered and defeated form, the two women obviously battling each other to a standstill. The desiccated man had a strange, half-smile pulling at his features as he watched the blue-haired woman rise and fall steadily, a stony, expressionless look on her face even in unconsciousness. Her Akatsuki robe had been completely burnt off, leaving her in just the long, slightly tattered purple top that split off on either side of her stomach and left the sides of her quite exposed. I remind myself of that every day. Naruto smiled lightly, brushing a hand through the now peacefully sleeping girl's hair. He wouldn't wake her just yet. Nagato seemed to sense his sentiment, looking up from the still brunette and across at the young man he had only recently been fighting with all his strength. It feels unfair of me to ask something of you, considering what I had tried to do, but would you help me with something, Uzumaki-san? The blonde just nodded slowly, a little confused as to what the request would be. To his surprise though, Nagato seemed to focus for a moment before the large machine he was strapped into shook a little violently, parts of it seemingly separating by some unseen will. Steam hissed out of the new openings as the front of the machine split apart, allowing the suddenly unsupported redhead to topple out. However, before he could fall pathetically to the floor, he was caught as Naruto dashed across the space, careful to avoid the chakra rods emerging from his back. You can just call me Naruto. With our eyes we might very well be family, you know. Nagato wasn't sure what to make of that, but nodded slowly nonetheless, allowing the blonde to haul the older, but lighter man to his feet. Thank you for this. Naruto raised an eyebrow, wondering what he had done beyond catch the man. However, the redhead saw fit to explain as he took a weak, hobbling step forward, barely putting any weight down and pretty much relying on Naruto to walk him forward. I just wanted to stand on my own feet again. For the longest time I had been living through Yahiko's eyes. Naruto looked to the side where the 6B of pain lay, having been summoned along with Konan. His eyes lingered on the Tendu body, Yahiko's body, for a moment before he turned back to the man he was supporting, doing his best to ignore the strange feeling he got from it. I deluded myself for so long, hiding behind a mask of omniscience and false godhood, believing my eyes made me special just because I had them and not because of what I used them for. A melancholic expression appeared on his face as Naruto finally allowed him to sink to the floor, even the short walk tiring his emaciated body. He gratefully sat down on the damp floor next to Konan's unconscious form, gently taking her hand only to wince as he saw his own, pale and disgustingly frail hand. It had been a long time since he really paid attention to his own, real body. I think that is where you and I really differ, Naruto. The blonde smiled lightly as he settled himself down next to the older Rinnegan wielder, feeling just a little awkward to intrude on what seemed like a rather personal moment between him and Konan. At the same time, though, it felt as though he had known the blue-haired woman lying in front of him nearly his whole life. It was still a little confusing. Maybe so, but that doesn't mean it's too late to change. Nagato seemed really thoughtful for a long few moments before the edges of his lips tilted up just slightly. I think you are right. He nodded slowly to himself, squeezing Konan's hand as he looked over towards where Yahiko's body still lay on the ground. You are very much alike, you and Yahiko. He would have gotten along well with you. Naruto couldn't quite explain away the elation he felt hearing those words. Experiencing Nagato's life, the admiration and respect he held towards Yahiko included, seemed to skew his perceptions of the man he had never actually known, and it felt weirdly good to be compared to him. With a start, Naruto realized that Nagato must have been striving towards that, to honor Yahiko's wishes and live up to the man's legacy. What will you do now? It was all Naruto could think to ask given his current confusion, and the question seemed to give Nagato pause for a moment. Return to Omega-Core first. Konan requires time to recover. Also, I think it is finally time that I lay Yahiko's body to rest. I did him a disservice trying to live through him. He spoke slowly, as if working through what he would do. Before it had been so simple. Capture the Jinchuriki, absorb the Bayu into the statue and wrest control away from the one calling themselves Madara before the man could enact his insane, infinite Tsukuyomi plan. However, a small smirk played at his lips. Given the information he knew now, the plan would have never worked anyway. And you, Naruto, what will you do now? At that the blonde paused, blinking a few times as his brow furrowed. I am not sure. He really wasn't. He certainly was not going back to Konoha, especially given what he had learned about the Akatsuki's true motives through Nagato's memories. With the village in disarray, many of their higher-ranking shinobi incapacitated and much of it actually destroyed, now was the perfect time for him and Fu to slip away. I suppose I will have to go searching for the masked man. His hand subconsciously clenched into a fist at the mention of his name, something that was not missed by the other Rinnegan user. I should warn you, if what he says is true and he really is Madara Uchiha, he is a force to be reckoned with. Even if he is not, he is an Uchiha and therefore dangerous. They too are descendants of the sage after all. Whoever he is, that Sharingan is powerful, especially considering he was able to pull the Kurama, under his sway. Naruto raised a brow at the way Nagato corrected himself. Maybe he wasn't the only one feeling a bit different after that exchange of memories. However, a moment later he blinked in surprise, realizing just what the redhead said. Bah, like I could ever really be controlled by such a pitiful ninja. He simply used the opportunity of my unsealing when I was confused and weakened to strike like the pathetic coward all Uchiha are. Naruto's lips twitched up at the vehement response from his tenant, but he did his best to ignore it for the most part. He looked back down, noticing Nagato seemed to be in thought as he looked out toward the opening in the paper tree. Rain had begun to lightly fall outside and was making soft pattering sounds against the surprisingly sturdy, temporary shelter. If you are unsure of where to go next though, might I make a suggestion? Naruto simply raised an eyebrow in Nagato's direction. The rain made a strangely calming symphony of patters and pings as it ricocheted off the various metal surfaces. It slid in rivulets or small streams down the sides of the buildings and gave everything an ethereal shine before being collected into the various pipes and gutters that carried away hundreds of liters of water from the village proper. Naruto and Fu sat atop one of the many great buildings that composed the supposedly minor village. However, Naruto could hardly fathom it as such as he looked out at the view from atop what he had come to know was called a skyscraper. The name was apt as the strange but intricate metal buildings reached higher into the sky than any other man-made construction Naruto had seen before. It had taken a surprisingly short time for them to leave High no Kuni and travel west towards Omegakure, Naruto having taken Nagato up on his offer to give them shelter while they planned the next move. Fu and Konan had woken up some time before they arrived, and despite initial confusions and immediate hostilities, the two Rinnegan wielders were able to talk down their respective partners. Even now, with the girl sitting next to him and their legs dangling over what many would consider an intimidating drop to the streets below, he could see her taking small glances at him. I still don't quite understand what happened. That man, Nagato, he is no longer our enemy. Naruto smirked, having expected the questioning sooner or later, especially after they had been given leave to enter the village by Nagato. The man needed time to recover, and it had made the perfect opportunity for Naruto and Fu to explore the new place. Naruto had suggested removing the chakra receivers if he really wished to lay Yahiko to rest and stop living through his paths. The desiccated redhead was certainly surprised when Naruto had told him that his legs were not unsalvageable. There was little damage after all besides the obvious muscle atrophy, third-degree burns and slight nerve damage. The only reason why he hadn't healed was due to the constant depletion of his chakra due to the chakra rods. It caused his body to naturally divert chakra to the most essential areas, leaving his arms and legs to waste away. Nagato had only worsened this by relying on that machine, although it was probably more to make up for the mobility lost when he had the receivers implanted in the first place. However, the man was resting now. The surgery was hardly without complications, what with many of the rods scraping by more than a few of his vital organs and arteries and requiring delicate removal. No, Nagato is no longer our enemy. In fact, we might actually be friends now. Fu blinked, opened her mouth as if to say something, closed it again as her brow furrowed, raised a finger and opened her mouth again, but only silence escaped her lips before she looked down again. Just what happened? Naruto smiled heartily, taking Fu's raised hand and holding it firmly in his own, instantly making the girl seem more relaxed as some of his warmth spread to her through the contact. Oh, you know, we talked, threats were made, we each tried to convince the other that what we were doing was right. I used my human path to relieve each other's lives. He came around to my way of thinking and now we're here. He couldn't help but smirk as Fu just stared at him evenly for a few moments before sighing dejectedly, her whole body slumping forward. You're impossible sometimes. Naruto grinned happily as he shook some of the water off the shugegasa he was wearing, more of a necessity than an aesthetic choice what with Am's weather. I try. Fu returned the smile quickly, wiping a few wet strands of hair out of her eyes and shuffling so that she was closer to Naruto, able to lean up against his side. You know, I don't even know why I bother to be surprised anymore. You'll just continue to do impossible, amazing things like always. Who else but you could stand in the ruins of your old home village, fighting a man professing to be a god and wanting to the Bayu out of your body 1 minute, only to then make peace with that man, convince him what he was doing was wrong and more than likely make a powerful ally in the process. Naruto's smile softened at that, looking back out over the new village the two had found themselves in. Absently he raised a hand, watching as rain droplets hit his skin before lazily rolling off his hand. This rain, it's a technique you know. Fu looked up curiously, her orange eyes peeking out from between locks of her damp, flattened hair in a way Naruto found incredibly endearing. It's Nagato's, it lets him sense anything the rain touches, even from the smallest, most hidden signatures. Of course right now it's useless as he's asleep, but it gives you some kind of scope of what he could achieve had he not been stricken by those rods. Fu tilted her head in confusion, wondering what Naruto was trying to say. However, after a moment of silence with Naruto just sadly looking as water dripped from his hand, Fu leaned into him a little more, her hair flung messily over his shoulder. You think that you could have become like him, don't you? Naruto didn't even look surprised, simply gaining a downcast smile as he allowed his head to tilt so that it rested over Fu's. The girl was always very perceptive after all. Maybe, it's just, we're so similar, shockingly so even. The loss we both experienced, the pain we felt, the revenge we took. He looked down, seeing Hanzo's quivering form as he slowly raised his hand, momentarily overlaying that of Yagura's, the look of fear in their eyes as they almost identical. I just don't know. Maybe I was only a moments away from taking to that ideal. Maybe, in a moment of weakness, I might have made the same choice, choosing to force other to experience my pain to ease the hollow ache in my heart. Fu stayed quiet, feeling a tug on her own heart as she heard Naruto lay his bear in front of her. However, she nearly jumped as Naruto suddenly turned, taking her other hand and looking right at her, a soft smile lighting up his features. That's why I wanted to thank you, Fu. The girl's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could even do anything, he leaned in, capturing her lips. Her body went rigid, but only for a single instant before her eyelids drooped and she leaned into the contact, breathing out a blissful sigh through her nose as she instinctively sought to deepen the K. Finally, though, they had to break apart, their cheeks having gained a tint of red and their breathing just a little heavier. You're welcome. It was more of a satisfied sigh than an actual response, but it made Naruto's face light up all the same, causing Fu's heart to flutter in turn. I may not have realized my feelings then, or even understood that any existed, but you were still there for me. Without that, then who knows? I really could have turned out like Nagato. Fu nodded slowly, her eyes still lidded and her cheeks still sporting a rosy hue. Even if you had, I would have still followed you. You rescued me. For just a moment, Naruto's soft smile faltered, his mind being assaulted by memories of Conan, memories that weren't his. Years of supporting Nagato, standing stoically to the side and aiding him in every endeavor, even as it pulled further and further away from their original goals, and more of her heart had to be sealed away. Would he have done the same to Fu? Made the girl give up everything for him because she owed him a debt? He hoped not, but, with the state he was in after Shizuku's death, and how easily Nagato had fallen, he just didn't know. Fu seemed to sense his slight hesitance though and brought a hand up to his cheek, a light smile pulling at her lips. Naruto, at one time I may have followed you because of what you did for me, but I love you because of who you are. Nothing will change that for me. The blonde felt his moment of slight doubt fall away as he looked into her bright, honest eyes. It amazed him how much she had changed from that guarded, broken little girl into the confident, happy young woman that sat beside him right now, enjoying the rain and the new sights. Conan. Naruto's eyes shot open wide in surprise as he nearly dropped the haori he had been about to put on, his gaze snapping over to the massive inland lake that Omegakure bordered. He could feel the woman's chakra signature growing dangerously weak, and with only a moment to grab his things he sped off as fast as he could in that direction, leaving a mildly confused Fu behind. He paid the girl no mind though as he practically bounced between buildings, unconsciously propelling himself faster with bursts of gravity from his feet that launched him between the high-rise buildings like a blonde bullet. He rolled across the choppy waters before using his hand to pivot, blasting him off the waters until he was in a sprint, a long, viciously sharp chakra rod flaming into existence in his hand. He saw Conan up ahead, being held up by her by the very same masked man that Naruto had been so intent on finding. The blonde wasn't going to complain if the man was so eager to fight him. That orange mask was cracked now and he was missing an arm, but he still had the strength to choke the life out of Conan, and Naruto strengthened the chakra flow to his legs, going as fast as he was able. With a grunt of exertion, the blonde threw the rod like a spear, throwing it so hard and fast that small streams of visible air bled from its tip. It phased right through the man's body harmlessly as he activated his irritating ability, but it served its purpose. Conan fell onto the water, her body slipping right through the man's now intangible hand and causing the man to look around as his body phased through 3 more chakra rods thrown his way. Ah, Naruto, I had wondered if you would come to interfere. In the broken portion of the mask, Naruto saw the man's gleaming red Sharingan narrow slightly as he smiled. No matter, I have what I was after. With that, his body swirled as if swallowed by some invisible vortex before disappearing entirely. Naruto only stared at the spot he had occupied for a few more moments before rushing across to Konan. She had sustained heavy injuries, including the partially crushed tea and the rather vicious and jagged hole through her stomach. Please, leave me. I am just a flower. Go, Nagato, help. Naruto bit his lip in indecision, knowing that Nagato was defenseless right now but not wanting to leave Konan to S when he knew he could save her life. It's alright, I'll help her. He blinked as Fu suddenly crouched down next to him, an analytical eye roaming Konan's wounds. Naruto smiled thankfully as the girl went to work with a glowing green palm before turning to dash off back towards Omegakure. The man calling himself Madara smirked victoriously as he held up the single Rinnegan he had carefully grasped between his fingers, holding it up to the light as if it was some fine work of art to be admired. He turned as Naruto dashed into the room, giving a wry smirk that was only seen through the slight crinkling around his exposed eye as he dropped the eye to join its twin in a jar of viscous green liquid. Nagato lay on the bed next to him, eyes big but still unconscious from the surgery to remove the chakra rods. You know you had me almost worried, Naruto. The man absently sealed the jar before allowing it to swirl away in a vortex of twisted air as Naruto could only watch. I was certain that Nagato would have at least exhausted you enough that I could swoop in and pick up the pieces. At the very least he would be S and I would be able to quite simply take these eyes of mine. But no, you continue to amaze and confuse me by interrupting plan after plan. Instead I decided to take a page out of your book and just go with the flow. Naruto's eyes kept glancing down to where Nagato lay, thankfully still alive but he would need attention fairly soon. On that vein I wanted to try out a little technique I just happened to pick up from a mutual acquaintance of ours. A certain snake actually. Slowly, almost mockingly so, Toby began to run through hand seals, making sure to stand very close to Nagato so that Naruto couldn't make any sudden moves. He wasn't exactly forthcoming with the information but I've been told I'm fairly persuasive when I want to be. The smirk under his mask took on a distinctly cruel edge as the man finished the last seal, making Naruto's eyes widen in horror at what he was seeing. Oh good, you recognize it. That should make things more interesting then. I was going to consider this a trial run but who knows, it could show real promise. Naruto just stared with wide eyes as next to the Akatsuki cloaked man rose a single gray coffin. Kuchio's, Edo Tensei. The coffin's lid fell to the ground with a dull, resounding thud that seemed deafening in the new silence the technique had caused. It was broken though as the masked man smirked, stepping back from the now open coffin as the blonde monk stared into its darkened interior, frozen with shock. His body slowly started to swirl away to the sound of displaced air but he couldn't help the chuckle that escaped his tea as he sent a final remark at his enemy. I'll leave it to you then, Naruto, have fun with your new playmate. Try not to it would be very inconveniencing for me. The blonde blinked his way out of the shock that had taken over him just as the man finished vanishing, managing to catch his lone Sharingan just before it completely disappeared. However, that was quickly put out of his mind as his attention turned back to the person stepping out from inside the coffin, a very confused expression marring their face. Kiribi. Naruto took an involuntary step back as the large Kumogakure shinobi stumbled out of the slate gray box, seemingly having to get used to moving again. That's impossible, you can't be S. He took another step back, his muscles seizing up as he desperately tried to deny what he was seeing. It just wasn't possible. Kiribi was strong, very strong, he couldn't have been taken down. However, deep down the monk knew he was just making excuses. It was the guilt at seeing his fellow Jinchuriki standing before him, now nothing more than a controlled puppet, all because he had constantly delayed going to find him. Yo, what's going on, Mr. 9? Kiribi stumbled a bit on unsure legs, a hand going to his temple as a wince marred his usually carefree face. Ah man, I ain't feeling all that fine. He righted himself, shaking his head as he adjusted to the strange feeling of, well, being alive again. Kiribi, the word stuck in Naruto's tea as his mouth worked uselessly, unable to say anything as his eyes widened and his hands clenched and unclenched. The much larger man just looked across at the monk, staring around at his surroundings with concealed confusion before looking down at his own body, following the few cracks that ran across his skin and clothing like he was some ancient statue that had been brought to life. Oh man, this is some pretty strange ain't no getting used to something like it, ya fool. Despite the shades covering his eyes, the surprise on the man's face was evident. Even more so when he suddenly pulled out the mulede of swords strapped across his back, throwing them up in the air as if he was discarding them. Whoa whoa, what's going on for real? It's like my be on the go but I ain't behind the wheel. Naruto had managed to stop himself for the moment, watching in shocked fascination as one by one Kirby began catching the number of swords, 7 in total, all across strange places in his body, although oddly enough he didn't use his hands. It's the Edo Tensei, you aren't in control. Kirby's brow just furrowed as Naruto's oddly subdued voice floated across the room as the teen slowly settled back into an unfamiliar stance to the Hachibi Jinchuriki. His shaggy blonde hair had fallen across his eyes to shadow them, preventing Kirby from seeing the few tears that had begun to accumulate before being quickly blinked back. I'm so sorry. Gently he placed his shakuju to one side, standing it up even though it had nothing to lean against. What do you? Suddenly and without warning Kirby launched forward, his body moving with a will entirely against his own as his limbs and blades became indistinguishable in the whirling, hectic style of his kenjutsu. Even Naruto had to widen his eyes as he struggled to keep up with the unpredictable and chaotic movements, having to dodge rather than block in most cases as he noticed the thin blue aura around each blade. He wasn't really willing to test just how durable his Asura path could be against lightning-enhanced edges wielded by a lightning release master. Yo Mr. 9, these movements ain't mine ya fool. Naruto simply maintained his grim demeanor as he continued to keep the humming blades just out of reach, maneuvering the spinning and bouncing Kumo Nin further and further away from Nagato's still unconscious form so that the man wasn't at immediate risk from being caught in the crossfire. However, after a moment B's eyes widened in sudden realization as a familiar feeling overcame him. Watch out Naruto, I got more limbs than this ya know. The warning came too late though as Naruto unconsciously tracked one of the blades that Kirby had thrown up into the air, only for it to suddenly be snatched by a long pinkish-gray octopus tentacle. The blade sheared right through the hasty but weak wall of sand that was put up in front of it, mostly due to the fact there was very little in the mostly metal room that could be broken down into the granular substance. However, it did provide just enough time for a third arm to sprout from Naruto's shoulder, quickly catching the blade in its palm. Thanks to his Preta path he absorbed most of the lightning chakra but the weapon itself was still sharp and dug into the mechanical limb's palm all the same, making the blonde wince at the dulled sensation. The monk raised a leg in time to block a vicious knee to the stomach but was left completely unprepared as the muscular Jinchuriki suddenly struck him right in the sea with a crushing double-fisted strike. By the time he had managed to pry himself out of the indentation in the wall he had been thrown into, Kirby was nothing more than a vague spinning buzzsaw again. Naruto quickly understood why the man was considered a powerhouse even without his tenant as he jumped back, glancing over to see how far away Nagato was before internally nodding to himself. Come on 9-0, you gotta stop me ya no. Naruto's eyes simply narrowed for a moment behind his veil of hair before he raised a single palm, hoping the building could handle a bit of damage. Shinra Tensei. Kirby had little time to do anything other than brace himself as he was roughly sent hurtling back by a wall of force. Far from simply embedding within the far metal wall, his chakra-toughened form was sent careening right through it, recklessly through the metal all the way out of the building. Quick to use the opportunity to move the fight further away from Nagato, Naruto rushed after the man-turned projectile. He absently noticed that it had begun to rain again as he jumped down to the street level, his haori billowing out around him. As he landed though he was quickly surrounded by an entire squad of Amjunin, all threateningly holding their kunai and giving him hard stares. You there, stop at once. The voice came out raspy through the respirator the Junin wore, however he was quickly see off as another Am shinobi, this one wearing a bandana, ran in and grabbed the arm holding the kunai. Stop it you idiot, this is the monk Tenshi-sama herself told us would be staying here, under the direct protection of Pain-sama. Almost at once the attitude of the shinobi changed as if a switch had been flicked, immediately lowering their weapons and bowing towards him. I apologize Monk-sama, I did not know. Naruto's mouth just twitched as he took a step back, very much unused to treatment of this kind. It's, his eyes widened as his water sense, dampened as it was by the perpetual rain bathed in Nagato's chakra, warning him of an incoming threat, watch out. He suddenly ramped up the gravity as he clenched his fist, forcing all of the Junin to collapse towards the ground, just in time as 4 tentacles, each bearing a lightning-infused blade, through the air above them, leaving an audible hum in their air from the high-frequency vibrations. The collected shinobi's eyes widened in surprise when they realized they had been saved from almost certain death. However, when they looked back toward the young monk, they only saw he was looking off down the street where the tentacles had come from. Damn it, Nino, that's just not enough. If you wanna put me down, you gotta start playing rough. The Kumo nin's voice was a little muffled by the sword held between his teeth, and white, papery wisps were floating towards B's body, patching up vicious gashes across his arms and back that had been caused by the rent metal on his way out from the building. Naruto scowled as he unclenched his hand, allowing the gravity around him to return to normal, tolerable levels. It might help if you didn't look like you were enjoying this so much. Despite the situation, Kiribi grinned a little bit as the tentacles retracted back into his form as if they had never been there at all. I may be S and all that, but I've never been one to lay down flat. This has been a long time coming, Nino, so I hope your skills are ready to show. You're full. Naruto growled lowly in the back of his tea. He really didn't have time for B's antics. It was like the man didn't understand the severity of the situation. Don't worry, Monk-san, we'll take care of him, for Pain-sama. The blonde's eyes widened when the Junin around him suddenly rushed forward at impressive speeds, many of them moving to flank the Kumo shinobi. Wait. It was too late though. The minute Kiribi saw that these men were in between him and what the Edo Tensei was telling him was his target, his body went into action. His limbs became nothing more than a buzzing blur of motion, S through F and kunai-like, and blowing past any feeble attempts to defend against him. However, as he moved forward, he found himself in the intersection between two streets where 4 of the Junin had awaited him in a trap. Suten, Mizurapa. Twin calls of the same technique rang out amidst the rain as the shinobi all blew out from their hands as if playing some invisible bugle. Highly pressurized jets of water rushed at the spinning Jinchuriki from both sides, leaving him nowhere to go. However, the shades-wearing man didn't even seem fazed as 2 tentacles shout out, catching blades that had been in motion before placing them in the way of the oncoming attacks. In a move that would have been impossible with human joints, the blades began spinning so fast they became nothing more than a grayish disk in the air, dissipating the streams of water into a fine mist that quickly settled on the ground. Before the Junin could even show their surprise at their trap failing, 2 more blades were out, quickly being S into the ground. Naruto winced at the cries of pain that echoed in the streets as he watery ground was suddenly E, along with the shinobi that hadn't been fast enough to jump away. It was a S move considering Kiribi was also standing in the water. However, with his Edo Tensei body it caused nothing more than a light tingling sensation. Naruto's eyes narrowed at that. Kiribi had become that much more dangerous if he had realized, and was taking advantage of, his body's indestructibility. Banshu Tenon. Before it could go on much longer, the Junin still trying to surround Kiribi were yanked back through the air, landing in a skidding stop behind Naruto before the blonde lowered his hands. He's too dangerous, I will deal with him. The bandanaed shinobi that had first recognized him immediately protested. But, however, Naruto just turned, leveling a cold glare that all the Junin recognized from the few times they had witnessed the god Pain. The chilling sight of the Rinnegan, blazing with chakra, was enough to make them immediately reconsider their opinions. Your Tenshi is injured and requires help and protection, she's over by the lake. If they weren't convinced before, they were now, despite skepticism that the Tenshi-sama was actually hurt. They immediately rushed off to assist, leaving Naruto alone, facing down the resurrected Kumo shinobi. Man, I know that was real cold. Is this what happened when you got old? Fool, ya fool. Naruto didn't deign to answer the dark-skinned man, preferring to end this quickly before more people could get involved and potentially get hurt. Edo Tensei were lethal to those unprepared for them, especially one of Kiribi's caliber. However, Naruto was prepared and knew how to beat them. He just had to get close enough. That was easier said than done though, as an unsettling feeling washed over the area. A crisp, acrid cloak of burning orange chakra began to slowly cover the Hachibi Jinchuriki's form. Sorry Naruto, the one pulling the strings is cranking it up a notch. At least now I got something for you to watch, we. One by one, as Naruto's eyes widened further and further, tails sprung from the cloak, none of them causing it to lose its defined edge like when Fu had raised her own number. When the blonde had seen the Jinchuriki use the partial transformation in the form of the octopi tentacles, he had thought it was some remnant ability like with Gaara's sand. However, if he was actually using the Bayou Shroud, that meant Kiribi, is the Hachibi still sealed inside of you? The older Jinchuriki grinned as he slowly began to sheath his blades, using the action to trick the Edo Tensei's control over him for the moment. Ha, you should know that a little something like S ain't gonna go prying, AK combo like me and all. Gyuki, ya fool. With that he rushed forward, the advanced speed offered by the chakra cloak making him appear like a vague orange blur. His footsteps caused little craters in the ground as he thundered down the street. Sumi Bunshin. The man brought a hand to his mouth before spewing out long streams of a viscous black liquid that immediately congealed on the ground and grew into perfect, if not slightly darker, replicas of him. However, before they could get any closer, an equal number of Naruto clones shimmered into existence, dropping their invisibility as they jumped in the way of the ink clones. Katsu. Before Kiribi could even blink at the new turn of events, the copies of the blonde violently exploded, turning the other Jinchuriki's clones into nothing more than black sludge on the ground. However, after a moment the Bayou cloaked shinobi just grinned, once again bringing his hand up to his mouth. I almost forgot you could make clones too, that's my little snafu. But if I remember right and there ain't no tricks, you can only make 5 or 6, we. This time when the man spewed out the ink clones there were not just a few, but over 30 of them, all of them rushing towards the now lone blonde like some kind of mob. When the blonde raised his hands up into a familiar cross-hand seal, the clones all scattered and only 6 were intercepted. 15 more were caught and crushed by a combination of Naruto's sand and chains. However, a few managed to get close enough to begin causing the monk serious worry. While Naruto was fast and even, he would admit that a trained shinobi of Kiribi's ability was just faster. It was partially why he was so reliant on Sage Mode when facing against Akatsuki members, to make up for the difference in speed that his less trained body was capable of. So even with chains randomly bursting out of his body and a chakra rod in hand to stave off their lightning-enhanced blades, Naruto still managed to find himself pinned for just a moment when one of the clones got his arm in a lock. He immediately began absorbing the chakra that the clone was held together by, but it was just a little too late. Rariato. When he looked up, Kiribi was rushing towards him much faster than before. Not only that, but his chakra cloak had thickened, entering the second stage as his body was encompassed by an almost second skin of bee-like energy, making the shinobi appear more bestial. What looked to be the skull of an ox wrapped around his arm, held upright perfectly level with Naruto's en. It was so fast Naruto didn't even have time to blast them all back. 1 minute he was being held in place, the next AC pain shot through his body as it felt like his head was attempting to be separated from the rest of him. At the same time though, his body, feeling the immense damage, began instinctively drawing on the massive source of chakra available to it, namely, Kiribi. The Kumo shinobi slowed down as the dense coating of chakra was leached off his body, naturally drawn into the monks via his preta path. Before he had even completed his run, he was violently blasted away by a sudden gravitational wave exploding out of Naruto's body, reducing the surrounding street to a rough, splintered crater. The blonde knelt there for a moment, holding his en with wide eyes but feeling none of the pain he should have. Ah man, I was sure that would work. Now that it didn't, I feel like some kinda jerk. Naruto looked up to see Kiribi prying himself out of a nearby stone wall, his resurrected form once again healing the miners scratched over his body like they were paper. The blonde just stared incredulously at the rapping shinobi as the brutish man cracked his en loudly. Are you trying to K me, Kiribi? Kiribi quickly shook his head, throwing up his hands in those strange gestures of his as his head bobbed to some inaudible beat, the Edo Tensei seemingly sated for the moment. Of course not, ya fool, to suggest as much ain't cool. I thought you'd have figured out my plan. You're taking way too long, 9-0 my man. Naruto growled as he picked himself up, wincing slightly as he noticed the damage he had done to the street around them, even unintentionally. Maybe if you just told me straight for once. Kiribi smirked as chakra once again began to bubble around his form, the tails waving menacingly behind him. Ya fool, I mess so that ain't no fun. Now come on Naruto, gimme one last run. The blonde huffed as he focused his chakra, a long, sharp, black chakra rod sliding out of his sleeve to be deftly caught in his hand. Now as I see you still don't get it, here's a clue. This'll make it real easy for you. Slowly Naruto's eyes widened in shock as B's form was overtaken by a noxious, overwhelming presence that grew upwards as an amorphous mass of writhing red chakra. When it reached its zenith though, it was as though a bubble had burst, and there, standing proud in the middle of a megacure, was the Hachibi itself. Conan smiled sadly as she stared up at the clouds above her. The brief gap in their coverage had passed and rain was once again softly falling over her skin. She didn't mind though. For the longest time this rain had been a reminder of Nagato's protection over their home, and before that it had invoked deep memories of the times when it was just the three of them along with Jiraiya-sensei. The pain from the wounds had long since ebbed away as the young girl who accompanied the man who swayed Nagato's heart away from his self-destructive path worked her over with that pleasant green light. You really care deeply for Naruto-san, don't you? The soft green light around the caramel-skinned girl's hands flickered for a moment as she blinked in surprise before resetting her features into a stoic mask Conan knew all too well. Despite her silence, Conan's soft smile grew a little, glancing absently to see that the shinobi that had come to guard him a few minutes ago was standing just out of earshot. I could see it in the way you looked at him and in the way you reacted to his presence. Fu finally pulled her hands away, the glow of healing chakra away for the moment. Why talk about this now? Conan chuckled softly, feeling too weak from loss and general exhaustion to do much else. I don't know myself, but I know I owe your Naruto-san a great deal for how he returned the Nagato I knew and remembered back to me. Fu hesitated a moment before returning to work on Conan's wounds, a faint hint of pink just touching her cheeks. If you really love him, then remind him of that every day. A slightly wistful expression unfolded on the paper uses normally emotionless features. You have no idea of how long it can last, when they might be torn away from you. It was small, almost unnoticeable, but Conan managed to glimpse the slight nod Fu gave. It seemed mostly to herself more than to Conan though. All the same, the blue-haired woman smiled softly as she lay back on the thin beach. However, she was startled when the surrounding buildings seemed to tremble slightly as an almighty roar shook Omegakure. With wide eyes she witnessed the might of Abayu unleash itself upon the small hidden village, making her wonder just what the man calling himself Madara had done. Nagato awoke with a start, the oppressive feeling of the Hachibi's chakra jolting him out of his induced sleep. However, when he opened his eyes only to see nothing but darkness, he panicked, falling off his bed in the process. A rough but silent gasp of pain escaped his mouth as agonizing fire shot up and down his back, the feeling of warm liquid that was spreading slowly across his back telling him he had likely reopened a wound from the surgery. He lay there a moment, his breath coming out in shallow gasps as he tried to figure out what was going on. He couldn't see, and when he brought his hands up to his face he realized his eyes were gone. At the same time, he hadn't impaled himself when he fell on his back, so the surgery was a success. For a brief moment he worried that Naruto had possibly betrayed him, his eyes out and running away. However, when he calmed himself for a moment and felt for that familiar sensation in the back of his mind that let him know everything that was going on beneath his rain, he felt the blonde's signature clearly, facing off against whatever was causing that horrendous feeling that flooded the small village. So there he was, without his eyes, trapped in a frail, weakened body with wasted legs and almost useless arms. He willed his arms to transform into something that would at least allow him to sit up, but nothing happened. Immediately he panicked again, this time mentally instead of physically, so he wouldn't further aggravate his wounds. If he couldn't use his abilities, then he was completely useless, nothing more than a husk of a blind man, certainly no god. His hand clenched slowly into a fist as he vehemently denied that though, his chakra surging angrily. Just because, his voice was weak and raspy but carried a strong undertone of frustration and determination. My eyes are gone. His body remembered the way the chakra moved, he remembered the way the chakra was molded. Doesn't mean, slowly, as if being assembled by a meticulous craftsman, his arms began to shift and disassemble. I don't have the Rinnegan. He panted lowly as his arms finished reconstructing themselves, resembling some kind of complicated piston system that allowed him to sit up without placing strain on his back. His visibly concentrated again as the area around his forehead began to shift, this time a little faster, and soon a set of orange-tinted goggles, almost like a visor separated from its helmet, rested over his eyes. And just like that, Nagato could see again, although, seeing, wasn't quite correct. It was more like changing his body's instinctual sensing of the immediate area, combined with his rain technique, into a visual format. Everything was a little blurry and unfocused, not to mention in black and white, but it was a start. Gently he lifted himself up before turning to look out of the hole in the wall. He could feel a chilly draft coming from. What he saw caused him to growl lowly, almost making him break out in coughs. Abayu was rampaging through his village and he could do nothing about it. He could feel Naruto battling against it, but in the state he was in there was no helpful aid he could offer. With a frustrated sigh, the man lay back down after dragging himself over to his bed, hoping that Naruto could deal with this. If he couldn't, then Omegakure would end up little more than a smoking, watery crater. Naruto stared up at the towering form of the Hachibi as the octopus stared back down at him, its teeth bared. Last time Naruto had taken on a Beiyu, he had managed to restrain the Rokubi with his chains, however it had been uncontrolled and wild. The Hachibi, however, was under the guidance of Kiribi, meaning all that destructive force was focused and concentrated. The blonde struggled to comprehend why the Kumo nin seemed almost eager for this to happen and tried to come up with some feasible reason why he would quite happily enter this state when the collateral damage would be tremendous. At the same time, something was nagging at the back of the monk's mind. Just why did Kiribi still contain the Hachibi? Surely it was Akatsuki's goal to collect the Beiyu and absorb them into the Gedo Mazo, at least from what he gathered from Nagato's memories. If Tobi had managed to defeat and K Kiribi, then why hadn't he taken the Beiyu into the statue? It seemed too much like a trap for Naruto not to be cautious. Did Tobi know about him taking in the other Beiyu? If he did, then what was his plan by practically offering him up the Hachi? Naruto's eyes widened suddenly in realization when he realized just what Kiribi had been aiming for by so willingly using his own tenant's chakra, knowing full well about Naruto's Preta path and his past absorption of the Beiyu. A small smile briefly crossed his face when he understood this last act of kindness Kiribi was performing for the Eight Tails. With that in mind, Naruto set his features. Apparently at the same time Kiribi seemed to get bored of waiting, or the Edo Tensei did at least. Silvery chains erupted from the ground at the same time a great leathery fist came careening down at the young monk. They crisscrossed a few meters above him, forming a makeshift dome that caught the fist, acting like some kind of strange sponge to soften the blow until the great fist stopped a few inches above the blonde's head, the Hachibi straining against the barrier in futility. A moment later and the chains suddenly unfurled, after giving Naruto a second to flicker out of the way. The fist crashed into the earth, churning up the surrounding street from the sheer force. However, Naruto was safely out of the way, and with a wave of his hand the chain sprung to life again, this time darting up and around the Hachibi's arm, looping over and over as they spiraled all the way up to its shoulder. Kiribi seemed surprised by the move and grinned at the clever trap, finding himself unable to wrench his arm out of the chain's grip. Instead, though, the octopus opened its mouth surprisingly wide as great globules of red and blue chakra began to collect in the air just in front of him. Naruto immediately knew what this was, having seen it before when facing off against Yagura. However, this time he wasn't fueled by rage nor unconsciously empowered by his tenants, he wasn't even in sage mode, he had no idea if he could absorb a Bijudama. Instead, his arm rapidly shifted until it had reassembled itself into a now familiar cannon-like appendage that glowed a brilliant white with the immense chakra being channeled through it. At the same time, the enormous and dense mass of chakra seemed to reach its zenith, pressing down on the surrounding area with its sheer weight and suppressed power. Naruto's arm let out a brilliant white beam of pure energy, splitting the sky like a shooting star. It passed right through the Imari, leaving a streak of white in the vision of anybody watching. After a moment of brief panic where it looked like the attack had no effect, great cracks suddenly began to spread around the violet ball of chakra, and before the Hachibi even got a chance to fire it off, it just splintered apart, revealing an almost earthen core before that too just dissipated into a sparkling dust. Too caught up in his surprise, Kiribi noticed the encroaching chains too late before they had wrapped around the Hachibi's entire form, forcefully restraining it and pulling it so that its head crashed against the ground, right at Naruto's feet. I'm sorry about this, Kiribi, Gyuki, I wish there was another way. He was a little surprised to see the enormous form of the Hachibi simply grin at him, giving as much of a nod as it could while its head was restrained in such a way. You do what you gotta do. 9-0, for me, I think it's time I go, ya know. One last time Naruto allowed himself to smirk at Kiribi's bad rapping before closing his eyes and concentrating on taking in all of the Hachibi's chakra into himself. Naruto sighed as he leant against a partially destroyed wall, an arm resting against the leg he had drawn up against his sea. Across the small alley from him sat B, secured to the wall and the floor by chakra rods driving through his legs and arms. Where the thin black spears touched him, his body seemed to turn gray and flaky, the technique mildly disrupted by Naruto's potent chakra. Kirby had reverted from his Bayu mode some way into the extraction and seemed to be paralyzed by having to go through it conscious, unable to fall asleep due to the Edo Tensei. Even so, Naruto had decided to be sure the darker-skinned man couldn't do anything. You did good, Naruto. The blonde raised an eyebrow at the man that seemed just as exhausted as he was, even in his resurrected state. The chakra rods seemed to at least disrupt his ability to take in limitless chakra. No rapping. Kirby chuckled half-heartedly and would have leant back against the wall to look up at the sky if his body wasn't immobilized. Nah, I think this KB is all buzzed out. Naruto smiled softly at that before grunting as he forced himself to his feet. Taking in the Hachibi had been no small task and his body still ached from it, but it wasn't over yet. I'm going to release you now. I'm pretty sure I can do this without taking your memories if that's what you want. Kirby looked contemplative for a moment before shaking his head. I never got to make my goodbyes, if I. Naruto raised his hand, smiling softly as he placed it on top of the shinobi's head. Say no more, keep them at the forefront of your mind and I'll see the delivered. Kirby grinned tiredly, managing to shakily raise his wrist and curl his fingers into that strange symbol of his, resembling horns. Mighty kind 9-0, you're a real hero. He chuckled as Naruto smirked, the two of them sharing a look. I guess I had one left, good luck, Naruto. The blonde nodded once before concentrating, remembering how Nagato had done this with such precision before pulling quickly, drawing out Kirby's soul with a sharp S noise. He watched it float up into the sky for a moment before looking down at the husk that had been his body. Gray dust and wispy flakes fell away from his large frame, revealing pale F and glassy yellow eyes underneath. Naruto grimaced at Orochimaru's lifeless form, finally understanding what Toby had meant when he had said persuasion. At least the snake got what he deserved in the end. Naruto took solace in that as he turned and walked away, intent on finding Nagato and making sure the man was okay. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.